Hey everyone, in this video, you're going to learn how to prepare for a valuation call. What are some of the common mistakes we see e-commerce sellers making as they prepare to sell their business? What they can expect buyers to scrutinize within their business? Some examples of why you should work with a professional to sell your business one day, and learn a little about Ian Drogin, our newest advisor here at Quietly. So thanks for joining.
Thank you, Sam.
All right, and you've been having, I'm sure, a lot of valuation calls recently. If you're or someone out there watches this as an e-commerce seller and they have a valuation call coming up, what are some things they should do to prepare, can do to prepare to have like a more productive conversation, or some of the things they should come in mind with? How can they prepare for calls?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So, the first thing would just be to get a clear handle on your financials. So, if you're able to put together a monthly profit and loss statement, preferably on an accrual basis, you'll be one step ahead because a lot of the questions that we'll go into are kind of based around what your financials look like. So, if you're able to show that, then we can talk about trends. We can go through various line items. We can understand your cost structure in more detail. The breakdown of kind of traffic sources will be more clear, or at least advertising sources. So that will just allow us to have a more in-depth, comprehensive conversation rather than have to wait till later to kind of put that together. I understand that sometimes it can be a bit of a hassle to put together a P&L right off the bat. So don't stress yourself out if you don't have it. I definitely would not do a valuation call because you're not at that point yet. But if you already have a bookkeeper keeping records for you, that would definitely be one thing to do. Additionally, just kind of, I would say, think about what the strengths and weaknesses of your business are. That's going to be something that we delve into. Of course, your advisor will ask you more pointed questions about different variables. But if you can at least kind of come to the table with a basic, like your own thoughts about, kind of what you think are the distinguishing characteristics about your business as well as potential flaws, that will also kind of help position us for a fruitful conversation.
Would you say there's any super common questions that you get in a valuation, either from the seller or maybe questions that you consistently ask in every single valuation call to a seller? I guess two parts. Maybe we'll tackle part one first. What are the
Yeah.
most common questions that sellers come to you to those calls with?
The questions vary quite a bit, but one that is pretty consistent, or at least comes up a lot, is, are you ready to sell? Or, am I ready to sell as a seller? And it's a really good question because depending on where you're at within your kind of timeline as a business owner will really inform what the selling process looks like for you and kind of what your value will be when you sell. So one kind of could call it an exercise almost that I walk through with a lot of sellers is what alternative paths exist for you besides selling. So selling is
Mm.
obviously one path, but what other avenues could you explore to kind of achieve your goals in the near or distant future? So a lot of these have to do with what steps you can take to get your documentation in order to make your business more transferable, if barriers exist in any of those areas. And then also just kind of what untapped opportunities could you pursue in the next 3, 6, 9 months or more to get to a valuation point where you'll be more satisfied with the exit. So I mean, again, there's so many different questions. I'll just stop there for now. That's definitely one of the common ones I get.
And then is there any, and some of these questions might be obvious, but like when you have a seller that comes in for a valuation call, what are some of the questions you ask in every single call?
Yeah. So why do you want to sell? And that kind of leads into what we just talked about. Um, when do you want to sell? If they do want to sell. Um, I try to understand the business model. So a lot of times it'll really vary based on kind of the kind of business we're dealing with. So I'll want to understand what the business is selling, kind of what the revenue looks like. Is it all through one channel? Is it diversified? I want to talk about trends. Um, I mean, there's so many questions, but I approach it through the lens of the four pillars of value, really, which is our growth, risk, transferability, and documentation. Really trying to look for how those pillars will apply to a given business. So again, trends, documentation, that all plays into it. If there's any kind of vulnerabilities in the business, we'll want to delve into that. It's important to understand not just kind of what makes a business attractive, but what is going to potentially be a concern for buyers, because we're going to want to face that head on. You know, talk about what those challenges potentially are, and then what paths exist to kind of overcome those in the future. So from a high level, growth, risk, transferability, and documentation. On a granular level, it really applies, but those are a couple of the things that we kind of get into.
And then I'm going to go back for a second because you mentioned one of the questions that you ask is when do you want to sell? And I'm curious how often when a seller comes in and says, I want to sell on, by X date or in X number of months, does it end up changing by the end of your valuation call or just after a few conversations?
That's a good question, and it often changes. Not always, but like I kind of said, I think in my answer to your first question is, in addition to saying this is what I think the value is, this is the range, and here's what selling would look like now, here are the other scenarios that you could pursue. So I try to lay those out, and often one of those other scenarios or paths are more appealing to a seller. So for example, if you come to me and I tell you this is what I expect your business is worth now, but if you do XYZ, I think you have a chance of achieving twice that in 12 months. A lot of times, sellers are going to choose to hold on to their business to kind of maximize value. So it really varies, but to answer your question, quite a bit. It often shifts throughout the call.
We're like preaching to the choir, just talking to ourselves here, but like that's why we always tell people come get evaluation early because you just never know. You never know what you'll learn that could make your value increase. Are there any key actions you recommend to, we'll say e-commerce sellers specifically, but it could apply to anyone with an online business that they can take right now to increase their value in the long term?
So one thing I always recommend, especially for e-com sellers, is bookkeeping. Keep track of your financials as soon as possible. Keeping a monthly profit and loss statement allows you to have more visibility into your business, into your cost structure, and it may not seem kind of obvious that this actually increases value, but it does, in that it allows you to identify trends very early on. If you notice that your advertising cost as a percentage of total revenue is increasing, well, that's one area of your business you need to look at. And similar with COGS, if your cost of goods sold is increasing, something to look at. It also helps you kind of identify opportunities to kind of, um, you know, reduce overhead if you have overhead that really isn't contributing value. It allows you to notice, like, okay, all my revenue is coming from this one or these two sources. Let's diversify traffic. So that is definitely one thing that, just as a business owner, having that visibility into your business is so crucial. Another thing is thinking ahead in terms of kind of what are the next growth initiatives you really want to pursue. Um, Always kind of having that growth mindset of kind of what can you do I mean, it's pretty obvious really, because trends is one of the most key things that influences your business's value, as well as your earnings overall. So just kind of having that growth mindset, and keeping things moving in the right direction.
Once sellers are sort of farther into the process, maybe they are speaking with buyers or they're in due diligence even, what's some of the advice that you give them? Like, I'm sure a lot of people don't really know what that experience is like until you're in it. And then once you're in it, it can be high stress, it can be very emotional. What's some advice that you're typically giving sellers in like the latter half of selling their business?
So once you're in due diligence, this is a really crucial stage. This is kind of where a buyer has an opportunity to learn everything there is to know about your business and verify everything that's been represented. And it's also kind of an opportunity to continue to build trust so that the buyer feels comfortable crossing the finish line, closing the deal, and that's when you have your successful exit. So what I would say is, be thorough and complete in responding to any questions or queries for information. Try to be as responsive as possible, giving quick responses. Even if you can't deal with something that day, just say, hey, thanks for saying this over. I'll get back to you tomorrow or whenever it is. And really just kind of being there and being as cooperative as you can to provide the buyer with the information they need, and doing so in a complete and comprehensive way that really instills confidence that you're not hiding anything and that they have the information they need to, again, feel confident completing the deal and crossing the finish line.
And Quiet Light provides a pretty hand holding experience, for lack of a better phrase.
Mhm.
So, like during that due diligence process, can you talk a little bit about, like, if you were working with Quiet Light, what does that like? What's the advisor's role in that process? What does that look like? How involved are we?
I would say it kind of starts long before you actually are in due diligence. So, one of the early stages of kind of preparing to sell your business is filling out this very in depth client interview document. It can really vary depending on the complexity and size of your business, but let's say 70 to 150 questions. Could be more, could potentially be less, but generally in that range. And this is really where we're diving into all the nitty gritty about your business and trying to understand it from a buyer's perspective, or kind of how a buyer will view it. So the reason I bring this up here is because this kind of helps us identify all the areas that we're going to need to address with buyers during due diligence. And of course, buyers may bring up new questions that we haven't asked. That does happen for sure. But at least getting as comprehensive of understanding of what we're dealing with when we kind of go through the process. Once we're in due diligence, a lot of it does take place directly between you as the seller and the buyer. I mean, you're the one providing information to the buyer. However, we are there throughout the entire process to let you know, is a request legitimate? Is the buyer overreaching in their request for information? Because that can happen. We also do generally we do weekly due diligence calls where we get on a call with a buyer and a seller and someone like myself as your advisor and kind of walk through everything and basically kind of help guide that process, make sure that what is being asked of you is appropriate, making sure that you can you under like helping establish clarity in kind of what's being requested of you. And it's also a little bit difficult to kind of put a finger on all of the kind of ways in which an advisor supports that process, but there are inevitably a lot of questions that come up, and a lot of these questions are pretty important questions. So being able to turn to an advisor who's been through the process, who does this every day, in my opinion, is pretty helpful in having that go as smoothly as possible.
Would you say there's any, common or just red flags during that process that can pop up that sellers can sort of think about now to avoid during due diligence? Or, like, what are the big questions that buyers ask in that process?
Yeah, so red flags. So one big one is when there's some sort of incongruity between what's been represented on the front end in the P&L listing materials and what is discovered later on. It's not completely, you know, out of the question that sometimes there's small mistakes or things that weren't known about a business that come to light during due diligence, even when all parties are being completely forthright and honest. Like that does happen. But being as thorough as possible in preparing your profit and loss statements and financials, in providing accurate information will really help minimize the number of things that come to light that we just didn't know about in our material to what the deal really entails. So that's definitely one thing. Another are trends. So one thing I always advise sellers is when you're preparing to sell your business, continue to run your business as if you're not going to sell. So you don't want to take your foot off the gas and think, okay, well, I'm not going to be getting 2 months from now's profit, so I'm going to lax a bit because buyers will notice and it will not help the deal past the finish line. So you want to keep running the business as if you're not going to sell. If trends start going down during due diligence, there's going to be a conversation about it. It could lead to renegotiation. So those are things you want to avoid. Keeping things, keeping business going as usual, continuing to run your business as if you're going to hold it forever is definitely going to maximize the likelihood of things going smoothly and reaching the finish line.
Ian, do you have any examples of a time where we're having an advisor with you by your side? In this case, you helped that seller cross the finish line with selling their business.
Recently, I had a deal where it was an e-commerce business. The owner was fulfilling all of the orders themselves, and it was a really interesting business. I think it has a lot of potential, and so does the buyer. However, as we kind of progressed through the process, it became very clear that it was not a very organized business, and there were a lot of different SKUs, a lot of different products to keep track of. And earlier we talked about how one of the important qualities is transferability, one of the four pillars of value. And this business had some serious barriers to transferability. The owner knew how to, keep track of all these products herself, but the buyer didn't really see how that was going to transfer to him as kind of the new owner. So this deal came really close to falling apart. And what kind of saved it is we came up with a creative solution whereby the seller would transfer um, only the fast moving SKUs, only the products that were selling consistently to the buyer at close. And then he would start fulfilling those, and that would allow him to kind of understand the process of fulfilling orders. And she would continue to fulfill orders for the couple hundred other SKUs that were moving very slowly, each of them, but between all of them, they represented maybe 20% of sales. So they were meaningful in that they were contributing 20% of top line revenue, but it just was very confusing to transfer all of that at once to the buyer. So we basically created a framework whereby he would start just kind of focusing on the main SKUs. She would keep the remaining, and over a period of 90 days, that would transfer to the buyer, so that he would, at the end of that period, be running the business entirely on his own, but not drinking from the fire hose, on day one out the gates. That was a solution we came up with to a problem of transferability that, again, almost derailed the deal. The buyer called me. He was about to walk away, and we basically started brainstorming and came up with this idea of making things more easy on the transition side for him, and actually probably made it easier for her as well, but allowed the deal to stay together and cross the finish line. Of course, the seller would probably prefer to be entirely out of the business, at close, as opposed to stay on for another 90 days, very part time. But at least we were able to sell the business, and she'll be moving on to the next chapter, and happy with the outcome.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, what I like about that, and maybe you could speak a little bit about this, is a lot of people ask, why do I need to work with a professional? Why do I have to work with a quiet light advisor or any? It doesn't have to be us. And obviously, the answer is you can do it by yourself. But I think there are definitely strategic and probably even just efficiency, if nothing else, reasons to work with a professional. So, from your perspective, and someone says like, "Well, why should I work with you? Why should I just do this on my own?" What would you say to them?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of reasons in my opinion. So one is we're doing this every day. This is what we do, and so we understand kind of what buyers are looking for, what areas of the business they're focusing on, what questions they're going to ask. Also, at Quiet Light, all of us have been through this process as an entrepreneur, so we have that firsthand experience as well. But basically, when you come to us, we're looking at your business like a buyer, and we're then going to present your business, highlighting all of the points that we know are going to be relevant for buyers. So right there out the gate, you're getting a representation that is cued into what buyers are paying attention to, what they value, what their concerns are going to be, so that buyers have a very comprehensive understanding of your business in a way that allows them to make an informed decision. Because buyers really need to understand your business in order to be able to decide whether it's the right investment opportunity for them. Additionally, if you've been through this, there's so many different stages and moving parts, from how to price your business well, how to negotiate with buyers when you get offers, how to field inquiries, even, how to kind of have those initial conversations and answering questions, which questions you answer, right up front, which ones should wait till due diligence. So your advisor really kind of serves as the gateway to your business, and making sure that buyers are going through the right channels, having conversations in the right way. Once you're in due diligence, there are a lot of questions that come up. There's a lot of back and forth. There can sometimes be difficult conversations, decisions to make throughout this whole process, and it can be a really emotionally investing and draining process. And having an advisor who, again, has been through this a lot of times, to be able to call, to be able to turn to for answers and for support throughout this process, in my opinion, is pretty invaluable because this is your life's work. This is maybe your most valuable asset. And having guidance throughout that process just is so, so important, in my opinion. Not to mention, at Quiet Light, we provide access to a very wide pool of very qualified buyers who have a high regard for Quiet Light and kind of our professionalism within the space. So you're getting access to that pool of buyers. So just from the exposure you get, from the representation and facilitation, there are just a lot of reasons why having an advisor can help you achieve a more successful exit.
Ian, you're one of our newest advisors, which is awesome. But you've been with Quiet Light for a very long time. But would love, why don't you tell viewers like what is your entrepreneurial story, or at least one of the times you sold a business, and how you came to Quiet Light.
So my entrepreneurial journey, I would say, started in college when I was 19. I did a internship learning how to run a house painting business. I excelled with it. It allowed me to kind of to contribute greatly to putting myself through college and traveling afterwards. I won't go through all of the chapters of my professional life, but then I later started an Amazon business and grew that while traveling for a while. Ended up selling it, got connected with Quiet Light, um, was on the content side for a while, and then moved into the role of advisor. And basically, I just now get to talk to other entrepreneurs and help them with what to me is one of the most exciting chapters of an entrepreneur's life of just selling a business. So I'm super grateful to have this role and be able to help people. And yeah, it's great.
Amazing. Well, thanks for the time today, Ian. If you guys want to work with Ian, you can reach out to him at ian@quietlight.com, or in general, come to quietlight.com, inquiries at Quietlight. We're available in all sorts of ways and would love to talk to you about your business. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sam.